Hello, everyone. I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar, OSOP Makeover, Effective Ways to Refresh and Customize Your On-Site Orientation and Training. I'm Jessica Birch with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Assisting me today off-screen is Amy Kanata from Education Northwest. You'll see Amy in the chat and the Q&A to assist you during today's session and to help get your questions answered. Jess Knight from Education Northwest will be managing the WebEx technology for our session today. We would also like to welcome our guest speakers for today. We're delighted to have with us Kapila Wewe-Gama. Kapila serves as an independent management and training consultant and facilitator and has worked with the Corporation for National Service, Peace Corps, and other nonprofit organizations. He is part of the VISTA Supervisor Orientation Training Team. We also have with us today J.C. Dwyer. J.C. provides advocacy, research, communications, and public policy expertise to Feeding Texas. Prior to working with food banks, J.C. was Director of Programs and National Service for the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, as well as an adjunct professor of social welfare policy at Hunter College. He has worked with anti-hunger groups, large and small, in 3 states. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in applied social research from Hunter College. Here is what we hope you'll get out of this webinar. During this webinar, we would like you to have the opportunity to examine ways to design a customized project-specific OSOT, to review techniques to create an interactive, engaging, and high-impact OSOT design, as well as identify techniques and tools to implement a training assessment strategy. Now, I would like to turn it over to Kapila to get us started.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for this very, very important conversation. So during this session, we are going to focus on 6 main areas. First, we will begin asking why OSATs are important. Next, we will introduce a 3-facet framework that you will be able to adapt to design and deliver your own OSAT. Then we are going to examine each of these 3 facets. We will also have the opportunity as we examine these 3 facets to hear about field examples from our VISTA supervisor, J.C., who has joined us today. And then towards the end, we will also show you where are some relevant OSAT materials are listed on the VISTA campus. And then finally, you will have an opportunity for questions. So those are the 6 focus areas for today. So in order to begin our conversation with a simple question to see how important are OSATs, we are kindly inviting you to answer the poll question on the right side of your screen. So please take a moment and submit your answer.
All right, we're just waiting for those to come on in. So if you haven't already, please answer the poll question. To the right-hand side, you do have a few more seconds left, and we'll get those results back. All right, looks like the poll has ended. We're just waiting for those percentages. Okay, so how important do you think OSOT is? So we have one person who said not important. B, for somewhat important, we had 5 people say somewhat important. 36 said important, and 112, by far the vast majority, said extremely important. There are also a few that said I'm not sure, but are looking forward to learning more. So Kapila, what are those?
Thank you, Jessica. So this is very encouraging because when you look at these percentages, most of you are highlighting how important the OSATs are. So we are very encouraged by that. And we also want to kindly remind that OSATs are a requirement the project sponsors have for the VISTA and the VISTA members. And also, we are happy to note that there is a part of the audience who are not sure about this and looking forward to learning about it. So you are also at the right place for this conversation. So next, given that you had indicated that OSATs are very important, let's take a moment to ask ourselves why. So we are kindly inviting you to enter your thoughts to the question, as you can see on the screen. Why do you think it is important to have a well thought out OSAT? So please enter your answer in the chat box and make sure you choose all participants. And also make sure that you keep your responses brief to few words and also make them specific. And once you enter that response, you also need to click on send.
Great, thanks, Kapila. So we're already having some responses come in. So why do you think it's important to have a well thought out OSOT? We have people here saying, in order to set expectations and build excitement for the coming year. They said that it sets a culture for the year, also the tone. It sets the stage for VISTA members and avoids confusion. Also, it's a first introduction to the organization, staff, the VISTA role and responsibilities. That's very true. Let's see. So someone here said that they think that a well-designed OSAT can provide the framework and motivation for a successful VISTA experience. Very, very true. Also that a VISTA needs to know about the organization and community in order to know how to better improve programs. And it also helps VISTAs learn how to navigate. And that helps the VISTA feel included in your agency. And this is a great way to end here. It gives both the VISTA and supervisors a blueprint for the coming months rather than going day to day. Yeah, these are all great responses. We're seeing a lot of the same themes here, that it sets the tone for the year, that it prepares your VISTAs and the supervisors for what's to come for this upcoming year, establishes expectations. So everyone's here is on the right track. Very good. Kapila, I'm gonna hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, this is very, very encouraging and very exciting. Because I think this is a great list that we could actually copy and print out and give to the supervisors and the supervisor orientations, because I think you all have pointed out all the very, very important reasons why OSAT is important. So our conversations with supervisors, former VISTA members, and VISTA leaders who have been VISTA members before, we asked them, so why do you think OSATs are important? As you had pointed out, among these many reasons, there are 5 that seems to always get highlighted. So let's take a quick look at what those are, and they are nothing new. They kind of captures, as Jessica pointed out, summarized what you had already put on the table here. So the first, all of them point out that it allows for the members to be well prepared with the knowledge and the skills for them to begin their journey. Then they also point out that it allows to build meaningful relationships with supervisors and with other members, their colleagues and other stakeholders during the OSAT. And also, members point out, and also supervisors have told us this too, when you have an OSAT, well-defined OSAT, it allows the supervisors to recognize the members' strengths that they bring to the table and also utilize them during the OSAT. And the 4th reason that they point out is it also allows to bring clarity to each other's roles, responsibilities, and expectations. which leads to building mutual understanding. And then the final piece that they always point out is that members become more confident and excited about their journey as a WISPA member. So, these are also represented in your responses before, and of course, as we saw, there are many more too. So we just want to highlight those, because when we really look at what the WISPAs, former WISPAs, current WISPAs, and supervisors and WISPA leaders have to say, that informs us in a very meaningful way how we want to go about designing and implementing our OSAT. So when we look at this, it also points out to three very, very important key dimensions of facets. So let's see what those are. So as you can see on the screen, the first one is the OSAT being customized. Then the OSAT being engaging. And the third facet is the OSAT being responsive. So we are going to take time now and take each one and examine what does this mean, how do you go about making sure that we really attend to this dimension, and then as we examine this, we will also have the great opportunity to hear from JC, our WISPA supervisor, who is represented here as a guest speaker, to hear how they go about focusing on each of these three different facets. So let's take a look at the first one, and that is the first facet, creating a customized OSAT design. So we invite you to at least focus on these three items that you see on the screen, and they are the WAD, which you all are very familiar with, the WISPA assignment description, then the project design, the plan, which inform all of the stakeholders, you and your WISPA members and other project stakeholders, about the community needs, the community profile, the goals, the objectives, and the expected outcomes. Then the third piece is also to utilize the members' resume, because from that, you all will be able to look at what are the specific skills and experiences that your members bring to the table. So once you, take a look at when you focus on these three main sources, we also, you can also use a simple training need assessment and analysis worksheet to identify the OSAT training topic area. So again, as you can see from the screen, here's one simple format or template that you can use to identify what your members need and how you are going to provide that. So referring to those earlier sources, we talked about the WAD, project plan, and design. You can identify in a very concrete way what are the different responsibilities or activities that your members have to carry out. So if you look at this worksheet, you have the WAD column for WAD activities, and then you have the second column identifying what are the required knowledge and aspects. Then also you have a way to identify what are the areas they are currently equipped, and also what are the areas that you need to actually provide training. So likewise, the next column you see, we do the same thing for the required skills for that specific WAD activity. So let's take an example. As you can see from this example, let's say your members, one of your members, very specific WAD activity is to create a local development advisory committee. So then you will take the time looking at the WAD, looking at the project plan to identify what are the different knowledge aspects that this individual needs, and when we identify that list, then based on what you know about your members' skills, strengths, based on your interview conversations, as well as from their resume, you can identify what are they currently equipped. The reason, as you know, the OSAT, you want to make sure that the time allocated for the OSAT is well utilized. So you really want to focus on what is really needed. So that way you can identify what they are currently equipped, and also then identify what are the areas that you need to provide knowledge as well as skills during the OSAT. So this is one way that you can go about using a training needs assessment. So now we are going to hear from our VISTA supervisor, JC, who is going to talk about how they design their training for a multi-site project, keeping this customized focus. JC, please.
Great, thank you, Kapila. Hi everyone, my name is JC and I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Communications for Feeding Texas. We are a statewide nonprofit here in Texas, and one of our primary functions is as a network of 21 local food banks. Because of this relationship, we were asked by CNCS to become what's being called an intermediary sponsor. Some of you may also be intermediaries, and what that means is that all of the VISTAs in the state who are working on our issue area, which is food insecurity, are part of our program. So we're their sponsor, and the food banks are their sites. We launched our program last July, and we currently have 17 VISTAs and 2 VISTA leaders serving across the state at our various food banks. And the aim of our program, because the point of VISTA is to build capacity, is to help our food banks to build outside partnerships with organizations that can help their clients with the causes and effects of food insecurity. So the upstream causes, which could be job loss or low assets, and the downstream symptoms, which can involve poor dietary health and poor general health. And so our VISTAs are busy building partnerships between the food banks, who are in the middle of that chain, and outside partners who can help them address those other services. Because we're an intermediary organization, we do provide a statewide training, and we also assist our food banks in developing their own on-site OSATs. I know we have a variety of people on this call, so I'm going to try to provide information about both of these steps. For the intermediary training, we provide it after PSO, and we try very hard to customize it to the needs of the VISTAs. However, because they are spread across the state and their sites are very different, we know it's important to keep the sessions focused on background knowledge and kind of the big picture information and skills that they're going to need at their local site. This is kind of our only real chance to get to them in the very beginning as a group and lay out sort of the vision for their work and the broad strategy that they're all applying themselves to, which is helpful when they get down to the local level and start dealing with details to remember why it is they're there and why it is they're doing the work that they're doing. We also know that this is one of the only times that they're going to be together as a group, and we find that having 17 folks spread across the state, you need a certain esprit de corps to keep them together, and so they know who's on the other end of the line when they're having conference calls and sharing ideas. And so it's really important for them to get to know each other during our intermediary OSAT. So we provide a lot of time for them to network and socialize so they can get to know each other and put faces to the names. Finally, we use the training as an opportunity to teach some very specific reporting requirements that we have developed for our program that includes the CNCS requirements, but also other evaluative components that we've come up with. And this is our chance to really walk them through those forms and see if they're actually understanding it and whether they have any questions. When we hand them over to their sites, to the food banks, we work with the sites to make sure that the OSAT that they develop includes several things. But the 2 biggest things that we need them to have at the local site are a time to review their VAD and a time to set aside talking about what the VISTA wants and needs to be successful with the year. Reviewing the VAD is very important, not just for the VISTA, but also for the supervisor to understand and reiterate what it was that they said they wanted to do for that year. And again, it locates the VISTA's work within a broader context so that they know they can always come back to that piece of paper in order to discuss what it is that they're doing and why they're doing it. It's also really important for the VISTA to be able to communicate to the supervisor what they feel they're missing, what opportunities they may have and skills they may have to help them be successful for the year. And a VISTA year is as much about the VISTA as it is about the work, and so it's important for the supervisor to hear that from the outset. Kapila?
Thank you, JC. Thank you so much for those very meaningful and as well as practical insights and adaptable techniques. So now we are going to examine the second facet, creating and engaging an interactive OSAT process. So before we look at a few aspects in relation to this second facet, let's hear some of the creative ways that you make your OSPs interactive and engaging. So we are again kindly inviting you to use the chat function to enter your thoughts to this question on the screen. And again, please keep your responses brief to few words and make them specific. And Jessica will again help us with the responses once we get some on the screen.
Thanks, Kapila. So we have some that are coming on in. Someone here, the first one, said that they do a community scavenger hunt that involves using public transit. That's a great way to get everyone acclimated with their surroundings. Let's see, they do stakeholder discussions and site visits. One project here does, they draw or make a diagram of what they understood they are going to do. That's definitely a great way to have something be taught in a different way. Let's see here. They said, another person here said, I found it useful to have my new VISTAs do some assessments of their existing skills and personal learning styles. This sponsor here does introductions to each department and tours of the facility and a visit to their member agencies. Great. Another one that's kind of like the scavenger hunt, we do a walking tour of the community and share information about the history. It's really a great way to know your community. Also, let's see, I start off by asking them what their goals are for the year and ways that they want to learn and grow. Definitely getting that done on the onset of their service is definitely helping them plan for the rest of their year. Another person here brings in all staff members for icebreakers and communication activities. They give the VISTAs a chance to get to know the people across the office. Yeah, so those are pretty much some of. We have some here that they attend a student orientations. They said that they're on a university campus, so they take the tour with prospective students. Another way to get to know that specific university community. And also social time with existing VISTAs. So if there's VISTAs in the area, definitely hearing it from people who've done it is a great way to make it interactive and engaging. So Kapila, I'll send it to you.
Thank you, Jessica. So once again, thank you so much, our supervisors. These are very creative as well as very engaging concrete ways or activities or techniques that you have suggested here. And we would like to encourage you, after this webinar is posted on the campus, after this session is over, we encourage you to come back and look at these techniques that your colleagues have shared, because there are some great ideas I'm sure most of you will be able to take from this great list. Okay, so building on what you have already put on the table that Jessica helped summarizing, we want to now examine this second facet, creating an engaging OSAT, and we want to focus on 4 different sort of overall approaches. And those are, we want to take a moment to talk about adapting an experiential learning methodology. The second piece is using multiple reflective settings in an intentional way. And then the third is to look at how we can create collaborative and peer learning environment in our OSAT. And then also to remind ourselves the importance of using icebreakers meaningfully and in an intentional way. So we will take each one of those 4 approaches that will help us to create an engaging OSAT and examine a little further what those are. So looking at the first one, the experiential learning cycle. So as some of you may already know, one of the primary adult learning methodologies used in the training world is David Kolb's experiential learning cycle. So his model, as you can see from the screen, identifies 4 specific stages an adult learner goes through when learning or mastering a new skill or a concept. So the first stage is the concrete experience. This is where the learner will have some type of experience in relation to whatever is being discussed or presented or whatever they are trying to learn. Then the second stage, the reflective observation, where the learner will reflect on that experience and then identify what happened and what were the outcomes. And then the third stage, which is called abstract conceptualization. During this stage, the learner will reflect on what the outcomes of the experience imply, what does that mean, and what the learner can learn from that. And the fourth stage is the active experimentation, as again you see from the screen. During this fourth stage, the learner will think and plan on how to influence the outcome in a similar experience in the future. So they will apply the new learning thinking to a similar experience when they encounter it again. So I know this is very theoretical. Now let's take an example. Let's take a practical Vista-specific example. So let's say you want the members during the OSAT, during one of your sessions, to learn about local community meeting facilitation protocol, right? Because we know every community, there are different processes to facilitate a local community meeting. So that's what you want your members to learn. So looking at concrete experience stage for that session, you can create an experience in many different ways. For example, you can, if it is feasible, you can create an experience by letting your members actually participate and observe an actual local meeting, if that is possible. But it may not always possible to do during the OSAT. So if not, then we can create an experience in other ways, such as they may be watching a video of a local community meeting, or they could be reading a case study of mistakes that someone made trying to facilitate a local meeting in that community. Or they could be listening to a current Vista talking about conducting local meetings. So you can create that experience in any way that is feasible to you given your own context. So during the stage 2, once they have had that experience, during the reflective observation, the members will reflect on the process, what they saw from that experience, whether reading a case study, watching a video, or seeing an actual meeting, or listening to the members, and then what they saw and what they read, right? So that's their reflective stage. Then during stage 3, abstract conceptualization, based on the reflections they had on that experience, now they will identify what to do and what not to do in facilitating a meeting in their own local community. Then during the fourth stage, which is the active experimentation, they will have an opportunity to plan and practice how they are going to apply what they learned in relation to facilitating a local community meeting. So then you see, again, when they actually in the community and doing a concrete experience, having a concrete experience, they will again go through this psychological learning cycle, and then they will become better and better. So that's one of the key adult learning principles that we invite you to think about intentionally using in designing and delivering your session theme or learning material. Next, we are going to look at the second aspect of creating and engaging OSAT, and that is collaborative and peer learning. And some of you, we are sure that you already do this, but we also want to kind of focus on this during this conversation because this is also very, very important. So, as you are thinking about designing and delivering your OSAT, we encourage you to think about opportunities and ways to encourage this kind of collaborative and peer learning. When you do this, you will create opportunities for members to utilize and share their strengths with their colleagues. You know, this is one of the things that members and supervisors have pointed out, as we have said earlier, members feel their OSAT being very, very meaningful when their strengths are being utilized. When you do that, what we also do, we establish a collaborative learning culture among our VISTA members, among that cohort, that they are encouraged to share their strengths with each other. This is not only going to serve us during the OSAT, but also in the long run, right? During their journey, they will be always willing to share what they have with their colleagues. And again, by doing this, what you are also trying to do, you are giving them opportunities to come together as a group, which is a great way of building the team spirit, the group spirit among your members. So now let's take an example to bring little meaning to this. So let's say you are planning to train your members in public speaking during the OSAT. So that's one of your sessions. Now, based on your analysis that we talked about earlier, looking at what they bring to the table, you found from your interview conversations and looking at a member's resume that one of your members are very good about, very strong in the area of public speaking. He or she has a lot of experience and expertise doing this. So now, you could use that individual member to train others in public speaking. So you are creating that opportunity for sharing their strengths as well as recognizing what they bring to the table. So that way, the others will, when they see that this is being encouraged, they might even come to you as the supervisor and say, you know, supervisor, I am good at this, and I know you are going to do this theme during the OSAT. Maybe I can also share some of the things that I have learned or I have done in my own life experience. So this is a great way to set that collaborative working culture among your members and sharing culture. Now, looking at the third aspect and the second facet of creating engaging OSAT, we also want to bring to your kind attention the importance of having multiple reflective opportunities during the OSAT for members to reflect and internalize what they are learning. What we have learned from our past training experiences, as well as talking to other people who have done a lot of this training, supervisors and so forth, what we all see, we have to be very, very intentional about designing opportunities for such multiple reflections. So generally, some of the key techniques for this to happen, as you can see on the screen, building opportunities for individual reflection, for pair work, for small group reflective conversations, as well as large group conversations. So let's again take an example to bring meaning to this. Let's say during the OSAT, your members are watching a video about a concept that you are training, that you want them to learn about. So once they have watched that video, you could provide them few minutes for them to individually respond to some reflective questions based on what they saw. So you are allowing them that individual time, because we know some people operate more effectively with their individual reflection than in a group reflection. Then, after you give the time, then you may pair them up and ask them to discuss in pairs about their findings, their reflections, their questions. Then you can put them in smaller or larger groups and create a more larger conversation. So that way we have intentionally allowed every member to make sure that their kind of learning style, engagement style is met. Otherwise, for example, let's say after the video, we just open up and just always have a group conversation. Only the members who are vocal, who feel confident talking in a larger group right away will benefit from that. But those individuals who may not have that learning preference can be left behind. So that's why we have to be very intentional about using multiple reflective settings, because this is also something that VISTA members and supervisors have pointed out, that we really need to make sure those opportunities are there, because sometimes we do so much sessions, so many activities, but we do not provide sufficient time for individual reflection, and that is where actual concept internalization takes place. So we want you to think about this, so that way we allow them to develop their analytical and critical thinking skills individually as also in a group context. And then looking at the fourth aspect of this creating engagement or enhancing engagement, is to be intentional, focus on including icebreakers and energizers. But when we do that, we really want to make sure there are a couple of things. One is we want to make sure they are purposeful and fun. Not just fun, but also purposeful, because we are working with adult learners. So for example, you might choose an activity that is fun, but also contribute towards like problem solving. If the purpose of the icebreaker energizer is to create an opportunity to build team building. So having an icebreaker, not only fun, but also having a team, like problem solving, will bring them together as a team, while also, you know, giving them some sort of an energizing opportunity. Then it is also a great way to make a segue. If your next session is about problem solving, so your icebreaker can serve that. The second is to make sure that our icebreakers and energizers we choose are inclusive. I sometimes have seen this in some training contexts. There are trainers with all the good intentions, come up with great icebreakers, but they sometimes leave out people, not thinking about inclusive aspects. So, for example, if we have certain participants using wheelchairs, then we need to think about, if we are doing an energizer, can they also fully participate, right? In our language, the directions we give, the nature of the activity has to be included. And the third one is also making sure they are culturally sensitive, because we want to make sure that the icebreakers, energizers we use are culturally sensitive to the participants as well as to the context, right, our training context. So again, this sensitivity should reflect in the language and also the type of material we use for such activities. Then the fourth piece is, it also, if we are very intentional, it also creates great opportunity for reflection, because icebreakers can create in-depth, very meaningful conversation. So let's say, if your icebreaker was them to come together and, you know, do some kind of problem solving, and then maybe asking a question at the end of the icebreaker, such as, how was it to do the activity without talking? If the activity was to do the problem solving without talking, then, you know, asking a question like that can generate a great conversation that you can take them to understand many different aspects of communication. So again, you know, being looking for where are the great opportunities for reflection. And then finally, we also want to ensure our icebreakers and energizers are appropriately timed or sequenced. This is also sometimes a challenge we see with training events in, you know, not VISTA, but outside of VISTA, many other training contexts. Sometimes there are great energizers built into the agenda, but they happen not at the right time, right? So for example, if you are finding during the OSAT or any other training that you provide to your members, at a given time, their level of energy is very low. Although your agenda may not have the icebreaker or the energizer at that point, maybe it's happening sometime later, now you know this is the time to pull it and make sure that they can benefit from that. So really appropriately timing it. So now again, with this great opportunity of having our supervisor, JC. Let's hear from him how their program at Feeding Texas go about energizing their members during the OSAT. JC, please.
Thanks, Kapila. So during our initial training with our VISTAs, they've already finished PSO, and typically they've already been at their food bank site for between 1 and 3 weeks. And I imagine they feel a lot like I did when I was a VISTA and had finished PSO, and all I really wanted to do was get to work. I didn't want to sit through another couple days of lectures. That said, we know that OSAT is important, and so what we do is we try to, give them a context, again, for their work. And part of how we do this with the content is we get them to actually take a tour of the local food bank in Austin where we're holding the training. This gets them up and moving around, and it also shows them the diversity of food banks and gives them an opportunity to compare notes and compare the operations of the food bank where they're placed to the food bank in Austin. It gives a good reference for the rest of the content. We also try to vary and mix up pretty much everything about the training. So we mix up the locations. We'll do the first day at a conference room in the food bank and the second day at a conference room in our offices. We try to mix up the content in that, we'll try to do something kind of dry and boring like paperwork and reporting requirements, and then do something more interesting after that. We also try to mix up the speakers. Since we're a statewide organization, we're located in Austin, we've actually got a pretty good well of speakers on various topics to present to the VISTAs in the areas that they're going to be needing skills such as cultural competency or evaluation skills. And so we lean on those people to come in and give little mini presentations to sort of break up the day and also show the VISTAs that there is this this whole group of folks out there who are willing to help them, because a lot of these folks are also part of statewide organizations. They have local contacts that the VISTAs might be able to talk to learn more, and they make themselves available afterwards as well. And so this shows to the VISTAs that there's a whole community of people who are trying to help them. At our sub-sites, it's a lot like sort of the first day of high school. You don't want to spend it in a lecture room all day and then just be released. There's a lot of new social setting and work setting that you need to get used to. And so we ask that the food banks, that when they get their VISTAs and they're planning their OSAT, that they have them shadow staff members so they can actually get engaged really quickly in sort of the culture of the food bank and see where their program fits. This is especially important if your VISTA is serving in a large organization where it would be easy for them to get siloed away and never really understand the context for their work. And so shadowing an employee helps them meet people and also understand, sort of where they fall in the pecking order. Another thing that we ask that all of our sites do in their OSAT is to spend some time reviewing the VAD with the VISTA and actually having them at the end regurgitate the VAD principles to them in another form. So this might take the form of an action plan or a timeline week by week for what they're going to do, and this helps the VISTA, give them a first assignment, something to work on. It's very similar to, sort of a school assignment if they're just coming out of college. And it helps them take that piece of paper in front of them and the conversation that that the site supervisor has had with them and turn that into something that they understand. And that could really take any form. It's really more for the purposes of having the VISTA think through what their work plan means in terms of concrete tasks. And we'll also give you a window onto their thinking so that you can look it over and say, this makes sense here, but you might want to add more time for this. And might actually help you to remember some things that you ought to have told them and forgot to, so that they understand better what it is that you were thinking when you put the VAD together. Kapila?
Thank you, JC, again for these very helpful examples as well as techniques, how you and your organization go about making your OSAT engaging and interactive. So now it's our opportunity to look at or examine the third facet, which is making OSAT process responsive to the emerging needs. We all have, most of us who have done trainings before have learned from designing and delivering similar training that there are always training needs that can emerge once the actual training process is on. We may have a well-designed, agenda, curriculum. In addition to that, once you have your participants in a training venue or a training room, suddenly new needs, learning needs seems to be emerging too. So for the vistas, we have seen there are two main contributing factors. There are many, but two that we want to first show you is some learning needs, new training needs could emerge from their time at the PSO. Before they come to the OSAT, as we know, they are at the PSO. So one of the things that they do at the PSO, one of the very meaningful things they do is to think about like questions and additional training needs that they have based on the thinking that's taking place during the PSO. So they are going to come to the OSAT with some of those questions and needs identified, which may or may not be already be part of the designed OSAT. And then also the other way new needs could emerge once they are at the OSAT is when they start conversing with other people, with us as supervisors as well as with other stakeholders. Suddenly they will find out something that they're like, oh, this is something I really need to know more, right? So we really need to like find ways how we can really identify so they can communicate those to us. So our OSAT is also responsive to these emerging learning needs and training needs. So let's hear about your own experience. So now we are going to again kindly invite you to use the chat function and share with the audience here what are other ways new learning needs might emerge during the OSAT, other than the PSO thinking and conversations with people, what we have showed. What are the other reasons or other ways that you have found your members bring to attention new learning needs during the OSAT? So again, use the chat function and please do make them brief and specific.
Yeah, so we're getting some responses in. So just to read out some of those that are coming in. So ways that learning needs might emerge. Someone put here having questions or problems when doing a task. Let's take a look here. What else do we have? Through observation of completed tasks. So once they finish something, they'll probably have some needs there. Says community needs may shift or trends may require additional training for members. That's a great one. By having VISTA CC person on the email, make sure that they have the right professional communication skills. So that's a great way to make sure that they're prepared for the kind of correspondence that your organization has. Let's see, report backs from work in field may require discussion and additional training to resolve any issues or questions that come up. Definitely a good time when those will come up. So here's another one. Let's see, learning from veteran VISTA members that are attending the PSO and can share experiences. Let's see. If the project has a shift in scope, definitely some learning needs may emerge. And then just some informal let's have coffee settings, general observations and direct questions about how each person learns best and what each wants to learn, definitely. And then also after learning sets or learning needs are set, asking the VISTA if there are any other tasks or learning needs that they want. And another one here on a last note, listing learning needs that have emerged in the past to allow VISTAs to share if there might be additional training needs. That's especially important if your organization has had VISTAs before. What were their learning needs? Having that marked down so you're prepared for when the next VISTAs come in. That's a great one. So Kapila, I'm going to send it back to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all of you for sharing those ways that you seem to identify other emerging training and learning needs. These are great reminders because by looking at your list and listening to what Jessica had just shared, it's good for us to know these these are the ways that these new learning needs could be identified, so we also can be very proactive. And another piece I want to highlight from the responses as what Amy has pointed out, the VISTA individual development plan. During the pre-service orientation, they also start looking at their individual development goals for their year of service. So they will also have something from that that you might be able to adapt into your OSAT design. So based on your responses, as you can see, there are a lot of ways that needs can emerge. So because of this, it is so very important to continuously monitor member needs and skills and do a pulse check, so we can ensure that their needs are being met in a appropriate and in a timely manner. So how do we do this? There are a couple of things, some of you already do this, but to gently remind our participants, frequent checking. You know, check-in during the OSAT, this could be daily check-ins, this could be a couple of times a day checking, or at the end of each key theme, checking how things are going, to what extent their needs are being met. So that kind of frequent checking. And then another piece that helps us with continuous monitoring, doing a realistic pulse check, is making sure open and inviting. What do we mean by that? To really, you know, open the forum during the OSAT, you invite them to their share their thoughts, their reflections, their needs. More inviting we are during the OSAT, more our members will feel comfortable as well as confident sharing their training needs. Because sometimes we may have individuals who may not want to talk about their needs because they might think by doing that, they may be showing some kind of a limitation about their ability. So that's why we have to be very open and inviting to those thoughts, reflections. Then, of course, as we always see, you know, creating a culture of feedback seeking, suggestions seeking culture. So when you create that culture during the OSAT, right at the beginning, when you create it as a group norm, then people will feel more comfortable coming and talking about their needs, how they have been met or how they have not been met, and how else you might be able to improve their OSAT experience to be more effective and positive for them. So again, one way to monitor and improve this through feedback from training evaluations, right? Some of you use informal, formal evaluations, different techniques and tools. Now, once again, let's hear from our field expert, JC, how your program uses evaluations for this purpose, please.
Thanks, Kapila. Our program was designed by a great social worker, and so we're very big on process. We have a very formal paper evaluation, both of our statewide OSAT and our site OSATs at the end of each of those trainings. And those forms are very simple. They basically line down all of the different topics that were covered, as well as the logistics associated with the event, and ask the VISTA to rate them and provide comments. And so based on that, we're able to evaluate, and luckily as an intermediary organization, if there's something we feel the VISTAs haven't caught in the initial OSAT, it's something we can pass along to the site supervisors and ask them to cover more heavily. It's also part of our sort of iterative process as we do these trainings every year. We try to make sure that anything that we had low marks on the previous year, we concentrate extra hard on the following year, and also try to adjust our trainings from day to day as we saw the members were unengaged or confused. Being observant and flexible was very helpful in those situations, and the ability to stray off the agenda a little bit was very helpful. So if you can do that, great. If you're the kind of person who needs a lot of structure, then you might want to build in some time towards the end of the day or towards the end of the OSAT where you can formally address things that didn't make as much of an impact as you'd hoped they would. And we try to pass that along to our site supervisors as well to make sure that they're observant and flexible, not just during the OSAT, but during those first few weeks when you can really tell whether someone is getting something or not. Kapila?
Thank you, JC, again for those helpful examples how you and your organization go about evaluating your OSAT, and then also not only that, how you use that data to help your vistas with the OSAT as well as with their ongoing training needs. So, utilizing these three factors we have discussed, and that is customized, engaging, and responsive. As you can see, that will help us to ensure that our candidates get the most out of the OSAT, that they are best prepared for their VISTA service, and that us as the organization will have well-equipped vistas who are progressing towards project goals. So while we have discussed these important aspects of ensuring successful OSAT, there are even additional resources that you can utilize on the VISTA campus. So on this page of the campus, you will find an OSAT checklist. Those of you who have not been to this part of the campus under the supervisors, there is a great OSAT checklist, a planning worksheet, a calendar template, and additional resources that you can use to assist your vistas with organizational entry, community entry, and also learn about their project. And then we also have on the same site, you can find this on-site orientation and training guidebook, which was designed by VISTA leaders for an Action Learning Challenge project. And again, as you can see from the screen, it includes a variety of helpful tools and ideas in the areas that we have talked about. So now we would like to invite you to reflect on the conversations we had and what you heard from your colleagues as well and JC, and think about few concrete next steps you would like to take towards creating a customized, engaging, and responsive OSAT. So as you are thinking what you might do in the future to enhance, increase the effectiveness of your OSAT, please share at least one step that you are thinking of at this point to make your OSAT customized, engaging, and responsive. So again, we are kindly inviting you to use the chat function.
All right, so we're just waiting for some responses in here to this question. I know that we are over time, so if you can stay, great, but we do understand that you guys are all really busy with not just VISTA stuff, but all your other everyday stuff. So if you can stay, great. We will definitely stay here for questions. But if not, this will be recorded, and all the resources that we've shared will be attached as well. So some responses are coming in. They said list, a step or a plan that you plan to take to customize your OSAT. So so people said, I really like the idea of the scavenger hunt. Let's see, include a reflection component to the OSAT. Have a well-written goal, which is always a great place to start. Start a weekly check-in to debrief work in the field. And also use returning members in the OSAT. So if you have previous VISTAs, definitely using them in that OSAT and see if they can provide feedback. So those are all great examples of great next steps to get your OSAT more engaging and responsive and customized for your project and your VISTAs. So Kapil, I'm going to send it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. And then finally, we also want to share some of these, I'm sure some of you would have already identified, but a couple of next steps, maybe thinking of conducting a thorough needs assessment analysis using the web, like what we had discussed using a simple worksheet, and then also created an OSAT evaluation mechanism process. So you can assess the OSAT during as well as at the end, as JC pointed out how their program is doing that. And then also identifying a set of icebreakers and energizers that again to be included in a meaningful and timely fashion. and then continuously monitor the successfulness of your OSAT and adapt to the needs of your vistas and organization accordingly. Because what your OSAT design, let's say what you did 3 months ago may not necessarily be effective in the same way if there are new changes in the community or in the project or in your organization as well as based on what your members bring to the table. So thank you. These are some things to think about. And with this, I'm going to hand this over back to Jessica for the evaluation and for the Q&A. Jessica?
Thank you so much, Kapila, and thanks, Kapila and JC, for being with us here today. You guys have such important and invaluable information, so thank you again. We also want to thank everyone here for joining us. Hopefully you guys found some good concrete steps for getting a new customized OSAT. So we would like it if you could just share what you thought of our webinar and take our evaluation. On the right side of your screen, you will find a quick poll where you can share feedback about this webinar. Please just take a moment to answer it. We do like to be able to improve these webinars, and we do listen to your suggestions and your thoughts. So please just take a few minutes to do that. So we have given you a lot to think about today, and it's now time for your questions. You can ask a question using the Q&A chat panel located in the right of your screen. And I'll also now ask our operator to let us know how to ask questions by phone. Operator, are you there?
Sure. You can ask questions on the phone by pressing *1 and recording your name when prompted. Once again, that's *1 and record your name. Please make sure that your phone is unmuted when you press *1. One moment for our first question.
Thanks so much, operator. And while we're waiting for calls to come in over the phone, we did get a few questions in the chat, and they had kind of a similar theme. So Kapila, this is going to be directed towards you. A lot of people had some questions about, we're a smaller organization, or we might just have a couple of staff members or even just one VISTA. So do you have any tips or suggestions on how you can make your OSAT engaging when you just have minimal, amounts of VISTAs or staff instead of like a big cohort or anything? How would you adapt what we've gone over here for those smaller organizations?
Yeah, one of the things, thank you, Jessica. One of the things for me, like if you are in that kind of a situation, again, think of creative ways or techniques that you can adapt so the VISTA can still have a meaningful, engaging learning experience. For example, some of our colleagues here mentioned about a scavenger hunt. Doing that kind of activity, or doing a scavenger hunt and maybe creating a community map. Once the person has done that, then actually sharing it with the supervisor. Then the supervisor can share, reflect on it, and say, okay, yes, what you have identified, the assets in the community, looks like you have got most of it, and if there are certain things missing, then the supervisor can provide those. So that way, if the supervisor doesn't have 2 hours to spend about talking about the community assets, you are getting the VISTA, the candidate, the VISTA member to actually do that exploration on his or her own, and then you don't need the same amount of time to build that knowledge, to fulfill that the need. So there are, then it could be, shadowing someone. If your VISTA staff is very small, then you might identify somebody else VISTA can shadow for an hour, couple of hours or a day that is relevant to what they are going to do. So, and then please also don't forget about if you have current VISTA members, as some of you have pointed out, they are great training resources. It doesn't have to be always the supervisor doing all the training. So you can utilize the current VISTAs that you have to provide some guidance, learning opportunities. If you don't have current VISTAs, I would encourage you, look around in your community, and there may be other VISTA projects. And this is something that we sometimes forget. We are not working in isolation all the time. You may have another organization having a similar project. Connect with that supervisor and ask, hey, looks like you guys have 5 members and you must be having an OSAT. Are there certain things that our VISTA member might benefit from, because if they are relevant. So I would, encourage you to think in creative ways to overcome that challenge of not having enough people or resources. Jessica?
Great, thank you, Kapila. And that's great, definitely utilizing organizations in your communities who, definitely a lot of people are recruiting around the same time. You guys can have, a welcome to community part of your OSOT. Get all of them together. That's a great suggestion, Kapila. Operator, do we have any questions on the phone?
No, unfortunately, we do not.
Okay, great. Just remember, if you guys do want to ask a question, the instructions are on the slide. We do have another question that came in through the Q&A. So this, Jessica asked, we have vistas that start and leave our organization at different times throughout the year. Do you have any advice for creating an inclusive, interactive OSOT for new members that includes time with current vistas, but isn't repetitive for the vistas that have already been through that OSOT?
Mm-hmm. So one of the first things comes to my mind, Jessica, when I look at that question, it's a great question as well. In which sense would it be repetitive? That's a big question I have, because in some ways, if you use the current VISTA to be more in a trainer, facilitator role, then it is not going to be a repetitive experience for that person, because it's different, and it will reinforce for that individual by sharing with the new VISTA what he or she has learned from their own experience. And also, that's another way you are telling your current VISTAs that they are a valuable part in the overall process. They are not only just there to do their task, but again, as we have talked about before, you are utilizing their strengths and skills to orient new VISTA members. And another great outcome of that, you are also providing meaningful professional opportunities for them to bond together. So their relationship building also going to be strong, but also within kind of a very professional atmosphere. And that's the kind of professionalism that would help us when that sort of bonding takes place. So I would encourage, as I said, to think about how the current VISTA could benefit still, playing with the same material but in a different role.
Yeah, I would second that. We use our ongoing vistas during their second OSOT. They engage in the large group setting. We have them facilitate roundtable discussions around VADs and various issues. And when they're one-on-one, we like to give them time not just as part of the formal day, but also to go off together and have some time to sort of give them the rules of the road from the perspective of a VISTA that's more informal, and like Kapila said, allowed them to bond a little bit. I'd say also that, reporting requirements change from year to year, and CNCS rules change from year to year, and so those are things that your ongoing VISTAs are going to want to know about, and that's a good reason for them to be there. And if you are going over the same topics twice, if you do employ outside speakers, as we do, one thing you can do is switch up who the speaker is so that they're hearing the same topic but from a different perspective.
That's great.
Yes, and just to quickly build on what JC said, as JC pointed out, I mean, if you have more than one current VISTA, I would, check with them based on what you are going to orient the new members or member. What are the areas that they feel passionate about from the OSAC agenda that they really want to take a primary role? Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Kapila, and thanks, JC. Operator, do we have any calls on the phone?
No, we do not. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we do have one last question here in the chat. I think it came out of our last, the question before last. So we have someone here who asked, or who said, many of our sites are the only VISTA site in their community. That they work with very small rural communities. So, so how would, I know we had mentioned, working with other sites, people in your, within your region who may have VISTAs at other sites. But in these instances where they don't, and they have they only have maybe one VISTA, what are different ways that they can engage how can they engage that OSAT to be a little bit more interactive?
And one of the things, Jessica, again comes to my mind right away. Please, supervisors, for all of us, let's not forget what the Vista campus can offer. Even, you could utilize it during the OSAT because, and also ongoing training needs, because there are those forums that, the Vistas who are working kind of in isolation can connect in a meaningful way with the rest of the Vista community in the country, and they might be able to go to the open space, other forums and pose a question and get some active conversations going on, virtual conversations. So that is one great opportunity, the Vista Campus Forum. And also there are other supervisors. You also may want to explore the Vista Campus, some of the great resources that members could use during the OSAT. I mean, there may be certain items that you will ask the Vista member to get on the computer and do that self-study, whatever the course or a certain material, explore it, do some questions. Then based on what they learn, then you can have a follow-up question, build on it. So the campus is also something, if you are in a creative way, that you can integrate into the OSAT, especially for those of you who may only have one Vista coming to your site. So that's another avenue that I want to gently remind all of us.
Yeah, small community placements can be tough. Typically, the Vista you're getting is either someone who's from the community that you've recruited locally, and in that case, they probably don't need a lot of work introducing themselves to the community, but they may need some time to reintroduce themselves in their new role to the community. And if you're recruiting someone from outside, they're typically the adventurer type who, may see this as kind of a study abroad kind of experience in West Texas or wherever they are. And in that case, it can be fairly isolating, especially if they're just sort of focused on their site from day to day. So in that case, I would build into the local site OSAT some time for them to actually go around and formally introduce themselves and potentially hold informational interviews with people who will be important to their work in the community. And in a small community, those can be some pretty important people. The mayor in a small community, or the county judge, or the superintendent of the school is generally more accessible than they would be in a larger city, and so it might make the Vista feel a sense of purpose in their work if they're able to get a meeting with that person or their staff and introduce themselves in their new role and try to make connections outside of their site, their physical site, so that they can sort of locate their work better in the community. I think, if you're running a statewide program as we are too, it's also really important, just like I said, to get that esprit de corps going and keep them focused on the fact that they're part of a group of people, part of a sort of a mini movement that's trying to accomplish something big. And if they're able to have a chance to meet each other, then even when they're placed abroad remotely, they'll have, the phone and the internet to connect with each other from time to time, and having that initial physical contact where they can put a face to a name and feel like they're part of a bigger picture is really important to keeping their motivation up.
Great, thank you, JC, and thank you, Kapila. So that's going to wrap us up here for today. We do just want to say thank you to everybody for attending this webinar, and we hope that you can join us on our next webinar. It's going to be in August. It's the Supervisor Circle for focus on recruitment. You can check the webinars page under the Connect and Learn to sign up for future webinars. If you do have any further questions or need more information about this particular webinar, please feel free to email us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. And that's it. So thank you all again so much, and have a great rest of your day.